the first session, we have 3 speakers. The talks are 15 minutes each. In order to not depend too much on technology and on the fact that many people are speaking from different parts of the globe, we have pre-recorded the talks, but the speakers are all here live too. So there'll be 15-minute presentations followed by a 15-minute period for questions and answers. And our first speaker is Praisy Poluan from Huntington Beach Union High School District in California. Praisy, I saw you online earlier on. Thank you so much for joining. We're looking forward to your talk. And Praisy has a really important message for us, which is actually right in the title of her talk. Teaching is a profession, not a fallback. I couldn't agree more than with you, Praisy. Over to you.
Hi, my name is Praisy Poluan, and today we're going to talk about teaching as a profession, not a fallback. Those who can't do, teach. This doesn't work out for me, I'll just teach. Why does society continue to view teaching as a backup plan for their original endeavors? When did teaching become viewed as a simple, undemanding job? With the rise of investigations into failed systems, it's time to launch our own investigation into the education system and how teaching has been instituted as a fallback job rather than the serious profession it should be. To do this, we need to look back at the core practices of education and why education really exists to begin with. Education began as a religious endeavor for the privileged. It evolved into track systems for the laborers and the learners until it was state-sponsored to educate all students. But what does that really mean, educating all students? To model everyday manners? To teach students to be good citizens in our democracy? To give them skills to succeed in their post-secondary lives? This is inherently problematic as education is unfortunately largely political. When we say educating all students, the term all has varied throughout time based on race, class, immigration status, and other factors that don't really encompass all students. In addition, we're explicitly told to teach content standards, but we're also implicitly expected to teach global citizenship, college and career readiness, empathy, social justice, 21st century skills, common sense, and I use that term loosely since common sense is actually quite subjective. Point being, we have to teach our students all of the knowledge and skills that don't really belong anywhere else, and thus we're thrown into the expectations for primary and secondary schooling, all while teaching our content standards and creating a safe and brave space for them to grow. Are we doing all of that? Can we do all of that? Can anyone that sees teaching as a fallback rather than a complex profession do that? To improve the culture surrounding education, we need to make it clear to the world just how complex our practice is, starting from within our own teacher education system. Take the education of other complex professions, for example. Doctors. After undergraduate schooling, doctors go through 4 years of medical school, consisting of content learning, boards, and rotations. They go through even more education as residents and during specializations, taking ongoing courses as they continue throughout the entire length of their careers. Lawyers. They undergo 3 years of law school after attaining their undergraduate degrees, along with internships and externships and a 2-day bar examination. Teachers? We take a few tests to show basic understanding of our content areas. We earn our credentials during our undergraduate programs or after. We spend a few months, maybe a year in observations and student teaching, and then we're just thrown to the wolves with the expectation of quality instruction beyond what we were even trained for in our pre-service programs. From there, we do have ongoing professional development, but most of the time they just throw regurgitated content and tools at us without the opportunity for growth, reflection, and application of new knowledge. We need to uproot both pre-service and in-service teacher education. In pre-service education, there's a widely problematic theory-practice divide. This is likely due to the failure to explicitly agree on a set of core practices to teach across all disciplines, as well as the lack of opportunity to intertwine those learning theories and core practices with the actual application of said theories and practices. Most credential programs teach learning theories without core practices and before the teachers delve into the field through observations and student teaching. This is comparable to us lecturing on what Newton's laws are and then months later expecting our students to suddenly remember and apply the laws when solving arbitrary problems. In doing so, we also fail to provide students with sufficient core background knowledge as to why Newton's laws are important in society and the real world, and how they apply to situations beyond just physics and the force unit of study. In credential programs, pre-service teachers are front-loaded with information on learning theories without actually seeing and analyzing them in the classroom setting. Without the opportunity to apply theory to practice, especially in the right setting, the theories are often forgotten, and the pre-service teachers fail to bridge the gap between their knowledge and practice. First, we must come together and agree on a set of core practices to be implemented across all disciplines. Why? Defining core practices is essential to building a solid foundation for both pre- and in-service teaching. By explicitly stating the core practices of what we must teach on top of our content areas, we show others how intricate teaching truly is, and we pave the way for our jobs to become what they really are, complex professions. No more of the explicit versus implicit job expectations. Aspiring teachers will know exactly what intricate knowledge and skills they will learn and apply, and others will finally begin to see what it takes to become an educator. So, what are the core practices of education? Well, that's what we need to come to a consensus on as a group of educators. Grossman et al. Described the core practices of education as multidisciplinary, preserves the integrity and complexity of teaching, research-based with the potential to improve student achievement, allows novices to learn more about their students and teaching because they should be practicing these from the start. Novices can begin to master them as they continue to practice them throughout their careers. And they must occur with high frequency in teaching because, again, these are the core practices of education. One example of a core practice might be creating an environment in which students can openly provide, accept, and apply constructive feedback. This one's twofold. Growth from constructive criticism is important for students to learn for both inside the classroom and for their post-secondary lives in society and just outside of the classroom. And the other part of it is that teachers must learn to successfully create an environment in which students can do so. Here, the teacher's core practice is creating the environment, while the students learn their core practice of openly providing, accepting, and applying constructive feedback. These practices can be implemented through any discipline, and they provide opportunities for growth in both the teacher and the student. From here, we must bridge what Leffern and Berry, Grossman et al., Horn and Campbell, and many others refer to as the theory-practice gap. It is not enough for novice teachers to know what they must teach and how to do so. They must also have ongoing opportunities to apply the core practices and reflect on the social, moral, and cognitive implications of their performance in order to improve. This is just as we would provide our students with opportunities for practice so that they can reflect and improve from there. Rather than beginning observations and student teaching after learning the theories and practices of education, we must push for a shift in beginning field work earlier in each credential program. Pre-service teachers can then apply the learning theories to their observations, reflecting on how they did or did not see a theory in practice, and in what ways they can adjust lesson plans in such a way to align with said theory. Teacher educators in the program could even enact theories in their credential courses and have the student teachers reflect on how the theory was applied or could have been applied within their classes. Experiences such as these are crucial in allowing aspiring teachers to draw connections between what they've learned in class and how each piece of knowledge manifests itself in classroom practice. Like our students, we learn through experience, we learn from reflective action, and we learn by context. Andragogy, as Mesereau describes, is in fact not so different from pedagogy. Adults, like pre- and in-service teachers, simply approach learning with different mindsets. This is largely due to context and culture. In most professions, there's a culture of learning as a finite process. Once you've completed schooling on your profession, you're done. There's nothing more to learn. But the complex professions, such as research or the medical field, instill a culture from the start that there is always something more to learn. Growth mindset. In reality, every profession should work this way, teaching included. We encounter new students every year, each with different backgrounds from the previous sets of students, for which we must adapt our instruction. Every industry evolves in some way, and we're expected to grow with each of them while also teaching our students to do so. Because of this need to instill a culture of professional growth within teaching, in-service teacher education must also be uprooted and revamped. Currently, in-service teacher education comes in the form of professional development. Webster Wright asserts that the current conceptualization of professional development is problematic. The term development in professional development frames in-service teacher education from a deficit mindset, as if we're now just discovering the missing pieces in our education. Reconceptualizing in-service teacher education as professional learning places emphasis on studying our existing knowledge of our students, of our context, and of learning, all as interrelated. Rather than missing major pieces in our education, we're simply growing in our profession by learning more about how our existing knowledge pieces are connected and how to better apply these connections in practice. Shifting this discourse surrounding professional development or learning allows us and it allows others to approach our profession as an intricate, evolving practice. In conjunction with shifting the discourse and focus of in-service teacher education, growth mindset must be evident in teacher evaluation processes. Currently, teacher evaluations are typically conducted by administrators. But there's an issue in expectations of administrators in that they need to acclimate to their new sites, they need to provide professional development, and they need to evaluate teachers on top of all of their other duties in running their campuses. This creates a vertical power dynamic that's not conducive to positive teacher-administrator relationships and teacher growth, which makes professional learning and evaluations even more challenging. With high administrative turnover, veteran teachers may not take professional learning and evaluations as opportunities for professional growth, and novice teachers run the risk of termination without the opportunity for reflecting and improving on their practice. If we can't take our own profession seriously, how will others? That said, professional development or learning has begun to shift. It's now typically run by teachers with perhaps some administrators or third-party educators. Similarly then, it makes sense for professional evaluations to also be conducted by the same professional learning leaders. Consider our own students, for example. We are the ones to teach them and evaluate them, rather than just handing them off to other teachers or administrators to be evaluated. So the same should apply for us. Shifting evaluations to peer educator groups or professional learning communities, if you prefer, allows for a positive environment in which evaluations can be productive rather than defensive. If peer educator groups run professional learning in such a way that they provide positive support without exerting those oppressive vertical power dynamics, then that creates a positive enough environment for evaluations to be about improving rather than just about being judged. Although these assertions are heavily supported by research, I do realize that they're considered bold in our current culture surrounding education. They are, after all, meant to uproot our education system, change that current culture, and evolve our jobs into a profession. It's essential then to remember the core practices of education and how they serve as a foundation for rebuilding pre- and in-service teacher education in order to advance teaching as a complex practice. The culture of teaching as a backup plan must change, and we must be the ones to change it. Thank you. And I'll take questions now.
Well, thank you so much, Praisy. Oh, there you are. You're showing up live now. Wonderful. Thank you so much, and thank you also for being on the chat. One of the benefits of having the talks pre-recorded is that the speaker can actually monitor the chat and respond to it. So if you have a question, just so that this goes orderly, raise your hand. The way to raise your hand is click on the participant button. It should be somewhere there below my finger right now. So click on the participant list. And all the way at the bottom of the participant list are a number of buttons, one to raise your hand and the others yes and no. So just to get a sense of people's ability to handle a participant list, click yes if you have the participant list open. So click the little yes button. There's also a thumbs up or a coffee or everything else. So I get, okay, good. And raise your hand if you want to ask a question. You can unraise your hand by clicking that same button again. I already see one hand that is raised, but I'm going to use my prerogative as chair to ask the kickoff question, if you don't mind, Praisy. You mentioned something really that struck home, namely that there's so much assessment that you are subject to that is really a content standard, which is really the input end of any course, right? What content do you put in? But ultimately, what we really care about is what comes out, which is really not that much content, but skills. And you mentioned a couple of skills. I think you mentioned 21st century skills, soft skills. I forgot which others you mentioned. How do you manage to strike a balance between a curriculum that is based on content and one where really the outcomes and the skills are the central point?
I'm so sorry. My dog was barking just as you asked the question. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so I was saying, you mentioned early on that as a high school teacher, you're subject to a lot of content standards. And I was saying, content is really the input end of the course. What we're actually much more concerned with in general in education is what comes out in the output, the skills that come out, the skills that you develop. How do you strike a balance between a content-based curriculum and an outcomes-based curriculum, one that is really focused on skills? And how much free, and this is maybe something that we can discuss later on in this week in the breakout sessions and over lunch, is, maybe you don't even have the freedom to really think that much about outcomes and are sort of forced in a straitjacket of content. What can you do as a teacher to change that?
So actually, the benefit of the new science standards, sorry, dog decided to start playing right now, of course. The benefit of the new science standards is it's actually action-oriented, just as you're saying, in terms of those soft skills. But the problem is right now is that a lot of teachers aren't currently, a lot of teachers aren't currently trained as to how to properly implement the science standards and how they're sort of built. Of course, there are some campuses and some programs that are, but if you look at current in-service teachers who went into or who are already in teaching once the new science standards were implemented, a lot of teachers don't have the proper training in terms of implementing them. Now, going specifically into the soft skills, like I said, the standards talk about phenomena. The science standards talk about phenomena and how to actually apply those. And in that, you're really making sure that the kids are applying those problem-solving skills. If we're looking at the other soft skills like college or career readiness, we really don't have a lot of the opportunity to do that. And so the way we would have to is to structure our projects and our programs in order to do that. For example, if you're looking at careers and you want to teach students career readiness like collaboration, then group projects. If you want to teach them communication, then the things that we normally do, like presentations, or even have them try emailing one another. But the fact of the matter is we're not trained to do that. And I'm sure a lot of us do that in our practice, but we need to train teachers from the pre-service programs and their teacher education programs how to successfully integrate that into their classroom practice so that we can teach that to our students.
Thank you, Praisy. Chess, Deramer, you have your hand up. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. So this is something I've thought about a lot, is teaching a profession. And I was really excited. Your talk's like a bolt of lightning. But right at the beginning, I think you hit something that's really important to recognize is lawyers and doctors, their professions are controlled by them. The American Bar Association is composed of lawyers, and they write the bar exams. The American Medical Association is composed of doctors, and they write the exams for doctors, and both of them are in control of their credentialing for both professions. Teachers are not in control of their credentialing. It's largely done by politicians, and I'm wondering how we can start pushing it towards where teachers, because I don't think we are a profession right now. We should be, but I don't think we are on a lot of that basis is we don't control our profession. And how something, I don't know if anybody has the answer, but how do we make that transition? How do we push that? Because that's what I'd really like to see happen.
Definitely. Yeah, so like I said, and you mentioned, it's largely political right now. We're not controlling it. Politics are controlling it. And so the quick and easy answer would be, well, we need to get, the people, the Secretary of Education, the people in charge to actually have that. Now, that is way easier said than done, and it's way more complex than that. And so my recommendation would be for a group of teachers such as us, and in other fields as well, because this carries throughout all of education. My recommendation would be for us to begin to develop that and take a diverse group of professionals. So take a diverse group of teachers, a diverse group of teacher educators, anybody sort of within the education field to get different backgrounds. And perhaps if we started to compile, kind of like you said, if we started controlling our own tests and credentialing sort of, tests, exams, things like that. We could even, somebody mentioned the TPA in the chat. If we even started it from that sort of frame, and expanded it from there, then it might be something that we could, implement on a national level. But I'm sure other people may have opinions on that as well. So if anyone wants to jump in, please feel free to.
So as I said, we're running a little bit late. I'm going to take one more question, even though 4 more have their hands up, and I feel terribly bad about not giving everybody floor time here. But I've started a channel on Slack called Session 1, where we can continue this, and I've invited everybody who is on Slack to join that session. So please, if you have a question and had not had time to ask that, ask on Slack. You can do it in the chat here too, but the problem with the chat on Zoom is that it will evaporate when you leave the Zoom session at lunch or in between even. So it's safer to have the chat in the Session 1 channel on Slack. So for the last question, I'm going to turn to V. Kumari. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Mazur. Yeah, my question is more about.
Please call me Eric, okay? I mean, no need to give me. Good.
Yeah, so my question is about the rigor of teacher education and credentialing. So what are 1 or 2 specific ways colleges and state departments of education can do to enhance the rigor of teacher education and credentialing? Instead of just a multiple choice test, can we have a more incorporate more rigor into the education and credentialing from college or a Department of Education perspective?
Maybe I can jump in briefly here, Praisy, because I think, what do you mean by rigor? I mean, I think in this question, what will be really important would be to define what you mean by rigor. I think different people have very different opinions about what rigorous means. And And I think there are many ways of testing for rigor that really don't tell you anything about actual knowledge. So please elaborate on that.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, so that, for example, a high school physics teacher or AP physics teacher, they have the enough background knowledge, a deeper understanding of deeper conceptual understanding to carry out some high-end investigations or even carry out some basic research at a high school level, instead of just focusing on a narrow set of concepts.
Well, that definitely needs to be approached through pre-service programs, I think. And in terms of assessing that, we need a lot stronger of a sort of national accountability to that. So again, the EdTPA was mentioned, the credentialing tests are mentioned, but the content of those and the way those are implemented is where they become problematic. So like you said, these tests are just for our content. Well, we need tests similar to the EdTPA on our actual skills and ability to implement and teach those soft skills. And in order to do that, we also need to train teachers during our pre-service programs how to approach that. So it's like kind of like not so much teaching to the test, but working backwards from there. If we can teach those skills more and make schools accountable to teaching those, then we can begin to assess teachers on how effectively they can teach those skills.
Thank you.
Praisy, thank you so much. Now, in case you want to, since we don't have really a way of applauding her live, if you click on this button here that says reactions, you can either give Praisy a thumbs up or a virtual applause. Thank you so much for kicking off this conference, Praisy, and for your great talk. There's a lively discussion starting here, and I see that already people have started to type into the session 1 channel. So let's keep this conversation going. And there's also a very lively discussion on the chat, including one, Michael McConnell said that, remote delivery breaks down a huge barrier for communication. So having this actually as a channel, maybe the fact that we went from the idea of having a live conference to a virtual conference actually opened up possibilities, and that maybe that we'll find out that this way of virtually networking is much more effective than an in-person. I miss in-person meetings, but at the same time we have the opportunity to meet so many more people and to remain connected asynchronously. So that's great. Now that we've kicked it off, we go to our second talk of this first session on networking. Phil Culcasi, who I happen to have met in one of the rooms. Phil is from Wheaton Warrenville South High School in Wheaton, Illinois, southwest of Chicago. And he is talking about a subject which is very important. I think we'll need your help, Phil, namely building a STEM teacher network from the ground up. Phil, over to you.
Hi, I'm Phil Culcasi, and this presentation is entitled Building a STEM Teacher Network from the Ground Up. I am a chemistry and physics teacher and science department chair at Wheaton Warrenville South High School in Wheaton, Illinois. A little bit about me. I've been teaching chemistry and physics and some math for 23 years, 19 of which have been at Wheaton Warrenville South. I've been department chair at South for almost 10 years. In 2012, I ran our first professional development workshop with 25 chemistry teachers, and that was the beginning of our STEM teacher network. This summer, I had hoped to run my 10th workshop, but due to the unforeseen circumstances of the pandemic, we had to postpone that workshop till next summer. And also, I am the director and co-founder of the Midwest Modeling Institute, and that's really what we're here to talk about today. I apologize for the orange background on all the slides and the orange polo shirt and the orange polo shirt in the picture. My first boss at Wheaton Warrenville South said that everyone looks good in orange and we should always wear orange, so that's what we strive to do at South. That is a picture taken from a workshop several summers ago, pre-COVID beard and COVID haircut. So a little bit about Wheaton Warrenville South and Tiger Nation. We are a K-12 district located about 30 miles west of Chicago. We have almost 14,000 students, 2 high schools. Our high school has about 2,000 students. We are 70%, I would say 70% non-free and reduced lunch, so 30% free and reduced lunch would be the makeup of our student body. The Midwest Modeling Institute is our STEM teacher network, and our STEM teacher network, we rely on partners. And so our biggest partner is Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, which is located in Batavia, Illinois, which is a mere about 10 minutes from Warrenville, which is very, very close to our campus. We also partner with the University of St. Francis. They're our educational partner. They're in Joliet, Illinois. We have corporate partners, which Flynn Scientific and Vernier Science and Technology have been very generous over the past 8 to 10 years. We also partner with our PTA, the Student Excellence Foundation, our district, and the American Modeling Teachers Association, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I mentioned before that I run professional development workshops for chemistry. Physics is really where this type of instruction started, and the hallmark of why we're meeting this week, and we'll talk a lot about physics as well. But we're very happy that we've been able to expand into middle school science, sometimes even elementary science and biology as well. I know I mentioned jokingly that everyone looks good in orange, but it's not just orange and black in our network. The names that you see on the side of the screen there, those are workshop leaders that teach at different schools that over the years have come into the fold with us, and they teach at Downers Grove North or Maine West or Glenbard East or Lyons Township or Scullin Middle School. So we have middle school teachers and high school teachers from different high schools that have come along and joined us on this journey. But it's not just those schools too. 2 weeks before we had to shut down school for good, on February 28th, teachers from all these different schools came to Wheaton, Warrenville South to learn about the type of instruction that we do and that our partners use. And so it's really a rainbow of different school colors that we have as partners now in our STEM community. So how do we do this? Well, we've expanded our offerings, like I said, to biology, all the way through computer programming and science, where we even have some options for AP Physics, AP Chemistry as well, middle school science, and even some elementary teachers who come visit us from time to time and are part of our network. To build a network, you need a great team. And one of my main jobs as department chair is to recruit and retain and hire great teachers, great young teachers who are willing to try a different type of instruction, who are willing to give their time in the summer, and who are willing to work really hard at being reflective in their classroom. And through retirements and teachers moving to other districts, we're always looking for new young teachers, and we have them luckily as part of our team. More importantly, you need someone to model yourself after. You need a hero in the classroom. And our hero in the classroom is a gentleman by the name of Jim Stankovitz. And he taught physics in Illinois for 42 years, 23 of which were at Wheaton, Warrenville South with us. And interestingly enough, 19 were at a school called Marist High School in Chicago, where I went to high school, and Jim was my teacher there. Jim won the Presidential Award for Excellence in Math and Science Teaching in 1992. And just before he retired, he was named the Hero of Education by the Chicago Bears. And they were very generous to give us some money to buy some new materials for our classroom. But what's important about that is Jim is an award-winning teacher, the best teacher that I've ever seen, that I've ever encountered. And when I had him in high school, he was a lecture demo teacher. This is actually my brother's notebook, because I couldn't find mine. This is my brother's notebook from Marist High School. When all we did in class was take notes and try and memorize those notes and regurgitate them on the test, we were engaging our short-term memory. And despite that, we all still thought that Jim was the best teacher that we've ever seen. And so I was lucky enough to come to Wheaton, Warrenville South in 2003. And when I saw Jim's classroom, it was totally different than the classroom that I had experienced when he was my teacher. Kids were working in groups instead of sitting in desks. Kids were having discussions. Kids were asking Socratic style questions. And so what we wanted to know is how did he shift his path in instruction? To build a network, you need a strategy. And his strategy was We need to shift instruction to teach things more systematically, to teach for understanding, to evolve big ideas over time, to engage long-term memory instead of short-term memory. So back in 2003, when I saw Jim's classroom and it was totally different from the way he taught me, I said, I want my classroom to look like that. I want kids to present their materials, to make their thinking visible, to think out loud, to work in groups, to have discussions, to act and think like scientists instead of acting like memorizers. So how do we do that? How do we get kids to think and talk differently about our instruction? How do we get them to explain in words? How do we get them to draw a picture? How do we get them to make a graph? How do we get them to apply those models in the lab or a mathematical setting? Well, you need to have professional development, and you need to take time to practice this new way of instruction. So this new type of instruction that Jim stumbled on after 20 years of excellent teaching, he stumbled on this type of instruction called modeling, which was developed in the 1980s by a high school physics teacher named Malcolm Wells and a professor at Arizona State University. Modeling was originally NSF funded. Its current iteration is called the American Modeling Teachers Association, which was a network of over 2,000 teachers, mostly physics, chemistry, and biology now as well, who teach the way that Jim learned how to teach. So the way Jim learned how to teach was he traveled to Arizona to take a 3-week workshop to learn about modeling instruction and this new type of pedagogy in the classroom. But what he came back with, and something that he passed along to us, and this has helped us build our network, is that if you want professional development, if you want to change your classroom, you have to do it yourself. Because most K-12 professional development meets its end because it's cyclical and it's a flavor of the month, and it's something that an administrator goes to a conference and they come back and they train the staff and it dies out in a year or two. So we wanted to create professional development by teachers for teachers, and that's how our network grew. So to teach this way takes practice. And so to build our own network, we have to run our own workshops. So what were the initial challenges in planning these workshops for summers back in 2012 and the fall of 2011? Well, you need a facility space. You need air conditioning in the summer, which is not an easy ask because all those AC units are shut down over the summer to save money. You need partners. You need someone to offer graduate credit so teachers can get credit for their time. You need support of your regional office of education so that teachers can get professional development credits to recertify. You need vendor support. You need financial support. You need workshop leaders, teachers who do this in the classroom so they can authentically pass it on to teachers who have paid for this workshop experience. You need someone to handle registration. You need someone to handle accounting. Now, with the advent of Google Forms and all of that, registration is a lot easier now than it was 8 or 9 years ago, but accounting is still a challenge. You need someone to handle the money involved in doing this. So, 9 years later now, what are our current challenges to keep building this network and running these professional development workshops in the summer? Well, we want to keep costs low for teachers because less districts pay for summer professional development, and teachers pay out of their own pockets, so we want to keep it low. Our fees are going up that we have to pay to the AMTA to use their curriculum materials. We want to develop new leaders as some of the original founders of this type of instruction retire. Grant funding is unreliable. We've gotten grants from Boeing and ComEd out here in Illinois, but they'll only give you money for 1 year and then they have to give you money, they have to give their money somewhere else. So that doesn't work. We want to spread the word is a continuing challenge. Social media makes that easier, but it's, it doesn't always seep through the stream every once in a while. We want to avoid modeling fatigue. Sometimes science teachers say, oh, you just teach modeling. That's just a fad. It'll go away. I don't want to hear about it. So we just talk about how it's our type of instruction. A lot of teachers talk to us and come to our workshops and they say, this seems great, but why bother? Because I have to give tests on the same day and I have to cover all this curriculum and I have to give common finals and common assessments. So I can't teach this way. So why should I be part of your network and come to your workshops? That is a huge problem for us. And the current issue we're facing is we weren't able to teach like this from March to the end of the year. So we weren't able to offer our in-person workshops. What if we are online for an even extended period of time through this school year? How does that change our instruction? Is this the new normal? Teachers have been reaching out to us, so it's nice to have that network of people, but we don't know what the answers are right now. We're working on that. But what we do know is that over time, over the last 8-9 years, is we get great teachers. We've had over 500 teachers from 20 different states, from different countries come to Wheaton, Illinois to learn about this type of instruction. Those are just our group pictures from 2017 and 2019. I couldn't find 2018 this morning. But we have a lot of fun in the summer, and that helps us build our network because we get a lot of like-minded teachers. We're doing science in the summer. We're going through what the kids learn over the course of a year. So we're putting teachers into student mode, and we have a lot of fun. And we do science, so we do labs, and we do discussions, and we do problem sets, and we ask questions, and we try to model what this type of instruction looks like. And teachers enjoy this experience, and by word of mouth, that builds our network. More importantly, we talk to kids because that's what we're here for, right? We're here to provide a great experience, a science learning experience to kids. So every summer we invite kids in and we ask them what they think about their experience in this type of classroom where it's not just lecture and take notes. So we're lucky that we've built this network out to other schools now, so that the kids that come in the summer are not just from Wheaton, Warrenville South, they're from schools throughout the city and suburbs. We advertise. This has been a great help to partner with the university because they take care of pamphlets and brochures and advertising. And we try and get the word out about our network as much as we can. So I guess in conclusion, to build the STEM network that we've built over the past 10 years, where we've had 500 teachers come through our building and spread a new type of science instruction out to the suburbs and the city and to different states and even different countries, is you have to get your district on board. And that's the first thing that we did, is we got our district on board. We invite administrators into our classrooms, other department chairs. We have teachers from other schools into our classroom. We have administrators from other schools into our classroom and into our summer workshops too. And we visit other schools and we present to teachers and we talk to kids. We partner with schools to offer grad credit, and we lean on them for help with advertising and organization and registration. You have to find someone else to handle your money. Otherwise, you have to create a 501(c) organization, and you need lawyers and accountants. And so luckily for us, St. Francis was able to handle our money. There's years where we ran at a loss just to keep the network going. That was in the beginning. We present as much as we can at conferences and even situations like this to get the word out. We recruit great teachers from other schools to be workshop leaders and to be part of our network. And most of all, we keep the conversation going about what we're doing in classrooms and how, the current situation affects what happens in science and in our classrooms. So with that brings me to the end of my 15 minutes. I'd love to open it up to questions about what we've done in Wheaton over the past 10 or so years, or anything else in the presentation. So thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Phil Culcasi, and this is about what we've built in Wheaton. So thank you.
Thank you, Phil. This was really great to hear that. And you were aware of that because you were on the chat. The chat has been extremely active. So please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. I'm going to keep a list here on the participant. And again, to remind you, click on the participant button at the bottom. And once the participant list is open, you have a number of buttons at the bottom. The first one is raise hand. You can also give virtual applause there. I see Brock, who has a question. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Phil, how did modeling go for you when you had to go online in the spring?
That's $1 million question of the day, isn't it? Right?
It didn't go well for me.
No, I told people that the last 12 weeks of school were 20th century instruction with 21st century technology. So it was a lot of posting worksheets on Google Classroom and a lot of videos on this is how you do it. We got a little bit better at it as we headed into April and May, where we were doing PhET simulations and kids were collecting data and we were asking modeling type questions of the kids. The problem was it felt a lot like a one-on-one discourse between me and the student versus the whole group. But we were unable to meet synchronously, which is the new buzzword of the last 3 or 4 months, right? So asynchronously modeling is very, very tough. Some of our teachers are doing workshops this summer to explore how modeling could work in the fall, but we're so unsure of what the situation is going to look like in the fall that it's going to be very, very tough, especially if we can't meet as a group of 20 to 25 kids and try and have the discussions the way we used to. So we're trying to take a lot of the good ideas that are going to come out of the next 12 months and hopefully incorporate them back into our classrooms, you know, eventually as situations slowly return to normal. But bottom line, it didn't work real well.
It sounds like everything you just said was very similar to my experience. So that feels good, I guess, that you're probably more experienced than I am. I've done modeling for 7 years. And since you're more experienced and you had the same difficulties, I feel better about myself.
Thank you, Brock. And thank you, Phil. I'm sure there'll be others who would be interested in commenting. I saw Donna's hand go up. Donna, I don't know if you have another question or you want to further elaborate on this issue of modeling online, but please unmute yourself. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. I am from a very small school, and can you apply modeling to a very small class, 5 to 7 students?
We've, you know, generally, I think I saw what you wrote in the chat there. You know, generally 12 to 14 kids is probably what you would like ideally. You know, 28 is certainly probably too much to hear all student voices. But we've had modeling groups of teachers with 5 to 7 people, and the discussions work fine. So with every situation being unique, I think more important than the number of kids is how you get them to buy into this type of instruction, where it's not just tell me the answer and I'll give it back to you. So, you know, if you set the classroom environment from the beginning of the year that this is how we teach and this is how we're going to learn, I think kids are certainly capable of buying into that even in a smaller group.
Oops, I was muted there for a second. So please keep your microphone muted unless you're asking a question or, like Phil, answering one. Thank you for that question. Thank you, Phil. Let's take one more question. Doc Roth, please unmute yourself because all the microphones are muted.
Hi,
Yes.
thank you. Yeah, this was very interesting. It's more a question about modeling instruction than the team building, and it may not be appropriate for this moment. But I was just wondering, I have never done the modeling instruction. My chemistry colleagues in a Boston suburb, Arlington High School, are very enthusiastic about it and starting to adopt it systematically. We've had so much turnover in physics that I don't know. Anyway, and we also do sort of a split physics thing: 9th grade physics for our standardized test, and then 11th and 12th grade physics. But I'm wondering, there's a tension in among the many goals in science education is creating a body of knowledge that is practical, such as what chemicals not to store or mix together, what those signs mean if you enter a burning building as a fireman, about what different chemicals are to be worked with, what are practical means to test for pollutants, extract solutes, and so forth. And then there are questions of constructing knowledge. How do we know that particles have charges? How do we know that there are atoms? What is the actual evidence that these models we build are reflected in the sort of matter? And I'm just curious, and also I know a lot of people who teach at vocational high schools, as well as the kind that the comprehensive tract high school that most of us worked in. And so there's this balance between practical applied knowledge, how to ground yourself before you work with something that wouldn't like a spark for what a field is. How do you find that balance, and how does modeling fit in? Because we can't build all the knowledge we need from first principles, all the knowledge that we actually need in practical work situations. On the other hand, I think we all would feel cheated and feel that our students were cheated if they never learned how it is we've come to know some of the big ideas in science. I don't know if this is the right forum for that, but it's something.
Well, certainly, you bring up a good point. There is a tension, and it's probably not even with modeling instruction, but with all different types of instruction, is what content is important for kids to know. And where we've moved a little bit is kind of like what Praisy was talking about, is we're trying to teach skills. We're trying to teach kids how to think, and whatever content the content experts decide necessarily has to fit into the course becomes the vehicle then to teach the critical thinking. So in this, like Eric was saying, in this day and age where evidence and scientific reasoning are taking such supreme importance, that's what we're trying to teach. And a lot of times high school teachers do get bogged down in arguing about which content should be included in a survey course for high school students. We really feel like instruction is the way, is the critical thinking skills with instruction. A couple of things I saw in the chat. I do agree that modeling is very, very tough in a current online environment. We're going to fake it to make it as best we can over the next semester. But I think the key point of kind of what I wanted to talk about today, and with what Praisy was talking about, is that the most important thing that we're doing, whether it's modeling or not, is we're going out and we're trying to find really hardworking teachers who have strong content backgrounds and let them do their thing by creating their own professional development. And to my mind, in my other job as a department chair, the most important thing I do is recruit and retain teachers. And I want teachers who, say, I could have been a doctor, I could have been an engineer, but I chose to be a teacher, a high school science teacher, even though I have the intelligent IQ to explore a bunch of different fields. So we're working on high school age kids to say, hey, in another day and age, you have the brain power to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, but I think you really have the brain power and the personality to be a teacher, and we want you to come learn with us and develop your own professional development. And that's really how we started to build our network. Is we found really outstanding, bright young teachers, and we kind of let them run with it.
Hey Phil, could I add to your thing real quick? I took a class through AMTA a year or two ago, and David Heston spoke one night, and he said most people will not become practical thinkers, and that to me is sad. Like, that's troubling that most people will not be able to think critically, and that's what kind of motivates me as a modeler, because I want as many people as possible to be practical thinkers in this world, because obviously it's going to help, but I felt like that was something shareable.
Good point. Good point. Thank you, Brock. Thank you, Doc. Thank you above all, Phil. Remember, we can't have live applause, so the only way to express your applause is to click that button at the bottom. Okay, I think we're all back here. So we're going to have the last talk of this first session, and then we'll take a real 15-minute break, because I guess everybody will need to occasionally get away from the computer and get some fresh air. I know how tiring these long days on Zoom can be, So I won't have any breakout rooms or anything. It'll just be a real break. Radio silence. And then we have Carl Wyman from Stanford, who will give us the first keynote. So the last speaker of this session is Shannon Morey from Abbott Lawrence Academy in Lawrence High School, which is in Lawrence, Massachusetts, not very far from where I am right now. And the title of her presentation is BiteScis, Engaging Physics Lessons Through Teacher-Researcher Partnership, something I care about very much. I've been participating in the NSF-sponsored RET program, Research Experience for Teachers program, many years. I would love to actually see how many of the high school teachers here have actually participated in RET programs. So if you open your participant list, if you have participated in an RET program, click yes. If you have not, click no. So I sort of know the ratio, because I presume that there are a number of people who will not respond or not be able to find out. So we have 4 out of 40, 10% so far. Glad to know that we have a few former RET program participants. I think it's a program that needs to be further grown. I really think it's very important to have this partnership between research and the teaching profession, not only at the higher education level, but also at the high school level. So we have 6 versus 62 at present, so the 10% is roughly correct. So I don't know if the next speaker is actually online. Yes, she is, Shannon. Thank you for being online too. Shannon will be monitoring the chat while she's speaking, because the talk has been pre-recorded, so feel free to jump into the chat and ask her any questions. So without further ado, over to Shannon for her presentation.
I'm Shannon Morey, and I'm going to be talking about BiteScis, which is an organization that helps bring current scientific research into the high school classroom. So very briefly, I'm just going to talk about what BiteScis is, kind of the physics lessons and the structure of our lessons that BiteScis has to offer, and then also talk about how to use BiteScis remotely or in a blended classroom situation. So to give you a brief overview of the BiteScis history, we're part of this family of bite sites, with the original being astrobites. And most of these bite sites are really focused on undergraduates. So all of these sites take current scientific research articles and distill them down to the undergraduate level, in order to help undergraduates better access current research as they're starting off their career in science. And so after years of having these bite sites available for undergraduate students, we came up with the idea to start taking current scientific research and distilling it down to something that a high school student could access, and that was also tied to current standards so that it was useful for teachers. So BiteScis started as a workshop at ComSciCon, the Communicating Science Conference for graduate students. And we brought teachers together with current graduate students, again, to explore these ideas of integrating current scientific research into standards-aligned lessons. So all of our lessons are designed by 2 people, 1 a current researcher and 2 a current teacher. So where are we now? Well, all of our lesson plans are available online for free. And so we have over 20 lesson plans available. Many of them are focused on physics, but we do have chemistry and biology lesson plans available. And all of them are aimed at kind of the college prep level high school class. That being said, we have a lot of teachers who have scaled it up to an AP level, or who are working kind of at the middle school level and have also kind of scaled the lesson plan down as well. We've also done some evaluation specifically around a lot of our biology lessons focused on evolution. And we did lose some of that data due to COVID, unfortunately. But we do have quite a bit of data that's kind of ready to be crunched, and we're hoping to do that in the next few months. So our lesson plans, as I mentioned, are available online. They're free for teachers to use. They're editable, so they're available both as PDFs and Google Docs. They are standards aligned. I'm a current physics teacher in Massachusetts, so it's really important for me to have all of my lessons very, tied directly to standards, and we understand that's what teachers need. They're a taste of current scientific research for students. So a lot of times students say, what am I ever going to use this for? And we really want students to see that the science they are learning now is very, very important and really foundational to what scientists are doing in research labs. And it's an opportunity for teachers to then explore those topics with students. It can be very exciting for a teacher to be able to present something, about mechanical waves and then talk to students about how these concepts are being used to help people diagnose liver fibrosis. And then it's opportunities for professional development. So I've written, some lesson plans with researchers, and I always get a lot out of learning from the researchers about what is going on in their scientific field that I wouldn't otherwise have had a chance to explore. Researchers also get a really wonderful professional development experience in learning how to communicate their science to a K-12 audience, which is something that many researchers struggle with. And we think that, we've had a lot of really positive feedback from researchers that it's helped them kind of get ideas on how to present their research to a wide audience. So kind of how are our lessons set up? Well, one part is the bite. And so this is written by the researcher and the teacher. And what this does is takes a piece of research from one specific paper and distills it down into something that is accessible to high school students and really focuses on the content that we want to discuss. So no, we're not taking the entire research article and summarizing it because that would be impossible. But we're taking, what we think is going to be the best for students in terms of standards alignment and accessibility, and presenting it to them in an interesting and engaging way. The bites also include profiles of our bite scientists. So we see this as, a very equal partnership between our researchers and our teachers. And so we present both profiles at the end of the lesson so that teachers and students can kind of see, who are these people, why are they interested in science, and, what are their interests besides science. Scientists are not just tied to a lab bench all day. They do have these other interests. And so part of our mission is to help students see themselves in the role of a scientist. And then, of course, there's the student handout. Typically, this includes a short introduction, some explanation on what to do, analysis questions. Then students are instructed to read the bite and then come back for more analysis questions where they tie everything together. And a lot of our lessons, they also, feature hands-on activities that the teachers can do with the students given the, certain availability of equipment or simulations, videos. There's a lot of different options that we have in our lesson plans. And then all of our lesson plans also have very detailed educator material. So again, as an educator myself, I took what I saw as the most useful things in lesson plans that I often find online and tried to make sure that all of those were included in our lesson plans in our educator materials. So it includes things like lesson objectives, so teachers have those if they need to put them into lesson plans themselves. They also have all of the answers to all the questions for the student document. So it can be really frustrating as a teacher when you see a question, you're like, I'm sure someone had a really good idea of why they're asking this question, but I'm not really sure what they're asking students for. I need to edit it, and I also kind of want to understand where that question was coming from. Well, we have all of our answers available, and so teachers can use that to help inform, how they edit and how they present this material to students. So one big part of our lessons that I want to discuss is misconceptions. So all of our educator documents have a misconceptions piece in them. And so we go to the literature, the education literature, and see what are common misconceptions in the area that this lesson plan is focused on. And in physics, a lot of times we have a basic mechanics lesson, and so we're going to that force concept inventory. And so I'm going to go through a couple examples of those and talk about the misconceptions questions that this lesson addresses and how it addresses. And we try to be really direct. So this lesson is called Acceleration Isn't Only Speeding Up. It's a really awesome lesson all about laser cooling and how laser cooling can be used to slow down molecules. And as you'll see here, there's kind of two common misconceptions that are addressed by this lesson. I'm just going to talk about the first one because it's specifically assessed in question 5, and we'll talk about that. So it says the direction of a net force and the direction of motion are always the same. And this is a very common misconception. I'm sure a lot of us have seen this in our classroom. And, you know, like I said, we try to address this really directly. So if we take a look at question 5 from this lesson plan, it says a bowling ball is rolling to the right and slowing down. A student says the ball must be experiencing a net force to the right because it's moving to the right. Do you agree with the student's claim? Why or why not use evidence from your observations of the activity to justify your answer? So students need to be thinking about the claim the student is making and hopefully refute it and say that no, there's not a net force to the right. And then they also need to tie it to observations from the activity that hopefully they did earlier in the lesson where they were using a bowling ball or a hover disc in order to explore forces. So we have a sample answer, and yes, it's probably longer than what you'd really expect a student to write, but it provides, you know, ideas that teachers can discuss. For example, at the very end here, it says, in fact, if the bowling ball was experiencing net force to the right, it would be getting faster. Probably a lot of students aren't going to mention that, but it does provide, you know, a helpful way for teachers to probe deeper to a student. Okay, so a student might say, I disagree. Well, why? What would be happening if the bowling ball was experiencing a net force to the right? And then we can get into those conversations more. We'll talk about one more example, again, a really common misconception. So this is in our lesson about cosmic explosions, which talks about dark energy. And so you might be thinking, you know, how am I teaching my students about dark energy as related to current, you know, scientific standards? And really we have a lot of things in here, but one common misconception that this addresses is that really common one from Newton's third law that in a Newton's third law pair, the object with the greater mass exerts a greater force. Again, we see that in the force concept inventory, and we see it in our classrooms all the time. And so question 6 from the student document here actually has multiple parts, but part F says, suppose galaxy B, and again, they've been given this figure, been talking about this figure in the earlier parts of the question quite in depth. So suppose galaxy B has a mass that is 3 times smaller than galaxy A. How does the force galaxy B exerts on galaxy A compare to the force galaxy A exerts on galaxy B in terms of both magnitude and direction? Support your answer by referring to one of Newton's laws of motion. So we're trying to cue the students a little bit to be thinking about it. But again, this is a really common misconception. A lot of students might say that the galaxy with the bigger mass is exerting a bigger force. But again, we give an answer, and then hopefully this helps elucidate some ideas that teachers can use to elucidate some ideas from students. So eventually, you know, maybe they're working in groups, maybe on Zoom, depending on next year. But then hopefully someone in the group can say, oh, you know, what about Newton's third law? These forces should actually be equal and they should be in the opposite direction. So again, all of our lesson plans tie to some of those misconceptions. So we have a bunch of physics lesson plans available on BiteScis. So I recommend that you go check them out. We have everything, you know, from mechanics to waves to basics about temperatures. The temperature lesson I actually helped write, and it's one of my favorites because it's about how corals in the Galapagos have been used to determine past sea temperatures, and then tying that to some basic concepts about temperature. And then we also have lessons about momentum, ranging from momentum of exoplanets to momentum of dolphins. So if you're thinking about using BiteScis remotely, we do have some ideas there. So we do have a special lesson about science in the time of COVID. It's different than our typical lesson because it's really just a bite, so that kind of that summary of the research. But it talks about why we need to be kind of critical consumers of science right now from the perspective of a scientist working in a lab that's working on COVID. We also used to have all of our educator docs available just freely. You could click and see it, but we realized that a lot of educators now, instead of using them in the classroom, are using them online. And if we want them to be able to assign things kind of asynchronously so that, students can't just look up the answer, we need to put it, kind of behind a wall. It's not a paywall. It's still free, but now you just need to request it. And usually, we're very, very quick to give you that request. So within 24 hours, you'd probably have access to it. And then a lot of our physics lessons really don't require any equipment. They're kind of minds-on activities. And so they're things that you can assign to your students with very little need to adjust. So I did a number of these lessons while my school was closed, and net force and the acceleration of spacecraft was a really interesting one. And there's some graphing there that's hard for students to kind of do on a Google Doc, but I was able to give them some different options for it. They could upload pictures. So there's a lot of, quick, simple ways to adjust that. And then some of our lessons that do suggest using simulations or do suggest using hands-on activities can be easily edited to use simulations or videos. So the example acceleration isn't only speeding up. There's a bunch of videos about bowling balls, and especially this broom ball obstacle course is a very common and popular activity in physics classrooms. So some good videos you can have students watch and discuss instead of doing the hands-on activity. Similarly, we have an introductory activity for animal navigation using magnetic fields, where students explore a compass and a magnet. And there's if you Google search this, there's 50 different simulations that allow students to do that exploration using a computer instead of the actual hands-on materials. So we love working with people in BiteScis, and there's many, many different ways to do it. One is if you're a teacher and you want to test out these lessons, either in person, blended, or completely online, then please do. You can kind of do an in-depth look at our lesson plan and give us really specific feedback using the beta test feature and tell us about it, or you can just leave us some quick feedback using the feedback form on the lesson plan. If you're interested in developing new lesson plans with us, please let us know. And then if you're interested in using a few of our lesson plans to think about some longer term evaluation, we'd be very interested in discussing that as well. So that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for your time. Feel free to contact me. I'm smorey@bitescis.org. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Shannon. That was wonderful. And a great conclusion to this first session. And I see that there's been a lively chat. So please continue that chat on Slack, where it will stay, because the chat on Zoom will go away as soon as we close the Zoom session at the end of the day today. If you have a question that you would like to ask, raise your hand in the participant list. Again, if you're not familiar, click that button there, somewhere where I have my finger. It should be roughly there, participants. And once you have the participant list open, you'll see at the bottom of the participant list a number of icons. The first one is one to raise your hand. So I'm going to give people a second to find that. And I also want to welcome Carl here, our first keynote speaker. I see that it's online. Thank you so much for joining, Carl. Any questions? Rather than asking Shannon in the chat, please ask that here. Maksuda, you have a question, so please unmute yourself.
Hi, so I do have one quick question. I know that, first of all, it's amazing. I really like what you're doing, especially the factor of, addressing misconceptions, because we definitely all face that, like, oh, the object is moving to the right, the force must be in the right. Like, that is probably one of the biggest misconceptions we go through. But how would you say that this gets incorporated if schools already have a style of lesson plan they need to incorporate? Like, is there a way to take this option and actually incorporate as if a school or a school district already has a template or something that they have to do? Like, how would you merge the two? Does that question make sense?
think so. I think one thing that I really appreciate about the bite-sized lessons is like my school also has kind of a standard lesson plan template, but within that we're given freedom on exactly what it looks like in our classroom. I would say one thing that's nice about the bite-sized lesson plans is that you can take the educator resource, which is like a full lesson plan, make a copy of it, and then if there's a lesson plan template that you have, you can easily like copy and paste from that document. And then even when you're thinking about how your lessons are structured, it's completely up to you how you want to use these materials. It's freely available online. And let's say you just like the bite and want to use that as a reading for your students, or I think we had a really good question about accessibility for ELL students. And I do think like one thing that you need to do is scaffold that more and provide those types of supports for students. But there's absolutely no restrictions on how you use it. We just make it available for you. And however you need to alter it, absolutely, please feel free to do so.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Thank you, Shannon. Are there any other questions to supplement the chat we had online? I see that you have quite a few takers and people who are interested. I had also myself never heard of BiteScis until I saw the title of your talk. So I think this is a resource that I definitely will want to, peruse as well. So last call for questions, raise your hand on the participant list. If not, I would like to extend many thanks to you, Shannon, and to the other speakers of session one. This was a great start to the meeting, and we've already started networking a little bit. See you later.